Is this a photo of an actual alien? It was taken on December 1st, 1987 by an ex-police officer who claims that it is absolutely real. He also claims that he was abducted and shown horrific scenes of coming destruction. Here's my husband, Damon, with the details.
It was still dark outside when ex-police officer Philip Spencer decided that he was going to take the 5-mile hike over Ilkley Moor, that's a set of hills in West Yorkshire, England, to visit his father-in-law in a village called East Morton. The sky was overcast and the air was frigid and heavy. On his way out the door, he grabbed his compass and his old 35mm camera.
I was hoping to take some shots of Ilkley, looking down at the town from the moor tops. The compass was a safeguard, even though I had made the 5-mile journey several times. It's surprisingly easy to get disorientated and lost up there, especially if the weather turns bad.
The ground was uneven, making the climb difficult at first, but as he gained height, the slope began to level out. Well, shortly after that, he stumbled on these narrow set of tracks that ran alongside the tree line. About the same time, he heard this faint humming sound coming from the clouds.
I thought it was an aircraft hidden by the overcast sky.
Then something caught his attention.
About 30 feet ahead, I saw what I can only describe as a small green creature moving quickly away from me.
In the dim light and at that distance, he really couldn't make out any fine details, only that this thing was small, and it was moving with this clumsy gait that clearly showed that it wasn't an animal, but it wasn't quite human either. Well, he called out, but the figure just kept on going. Then, strangely, just before it disappeared around this outcropping of rock, it turned around for just a moment, and then it seemed to raise an arm up, as if it were shooing him away. Well, without really thinking about it, Philip brought the camera up to his face, and he snapped a photograph.
Welcome to Velarcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband shares the details.
The very instant after Philip snapped the photo, he jumped off of the embankment and then chased after this thing. Well, the figure moved fast, but oddly, it didn't exactly run. No, it kind of shuffled, but with this surprising speed. Then it disappeared around an outcropping of rock. When Philip came around the corner, he couldn't believe his eyes. Directly out in front of him was this large silver craft. It was shaped like two saucers joined edge to edge, with some sort of a box sticking out of the top of it, descending into the object. The humming that he had heard earlier was much louder now, and it was rising in pitch. Well, Philip just stood there as this object lifted straight up and then shot vertically into the clouds, vanishing almost immediately. The entire experience was extremely surreal, and for just a moment, Philip wasn't even able to move. Well, once he caught his breath, he found that he was too shaken to continue on to his father-in-law's, so he turned around and he headed for the town of Ilkley. Now, here's the interesting part. He had only left his house about 30 minutes ago, and the walk from the point to where he was now to the town of Ilkley was about another 30 minutes. But once he reached the town, he found that the shops were all open, and the clock of the town hall showed that it was 10 a.m. He had left his home right around 7. By every measure of time, there was no way that it could have been any later than maybe 8:30. Yet here it was, an hour and a half past that. Well, he just couldn't understand it, and for just a moment, he wondered if he just might be losing his mind. And then he remembered the photograph. So shortly after this, he got the film developed, and when he came back, it solidified his experience. The image was dark and grainy, exactly as he had expected, given the low light in the old camera. Yet, there it was. Standing in the hollow was a small green figure, just as he had seen earlier with his own eyes. The shape was indistinct, but it was undeniably there. What had he actually photographed? Or what had caused an hour and a half of time to slip away from him? Well, these questions were puzzling, and at first he thought that this photograph was the only proof that this event had actually even happened. That is, until he discovered the impossible change that took place in the magnetic field of the compass. Philip Spencer was an ex-police officer, and he had future prospects of maybe one day rejoining the force. So the last thing that he wanted was to be labeled as one of those kooks who had seen a UFO. That most certainly would not help him regain his status as a police officer. Still, he had to find out, make some sense of what had happened up in those hills. So he decided that he would reach out to Jenny Randles. She's a highly respected paranormal researcher and UFO investigator who at the time was acting as the reports coordinator for BUFORA. The letter was dated December 3rd, only 2 days after the incident. In it, Philip described what he had seen in a sort of no-fluff, matter-of-fact way. And he also reached out to Arthur Tomlinson. He was a UFO investigator who, by this time in his life, had already studied reports of UFOs for over 30 years. Tomlinson agreed that he would come out and investigate the incident. He and Steve Ballin, another UFO investigator, drove across to Ilkley, and the three of them went up into the hills and took a look at the area. During that first meeting, Philip handed over not only the print, but the original negative and the compass as well. He did so completely without hesitation, stating that all he wanted was to figure out exactly what it was that had happened. Interestingly, when the investigators got the photograph, they noticed a strange square object just behind and a little to the right of the supposed creature. You can see it right here. It's lighter colored with 90-degree corners and straight lines. And this is the area that the creature ran to, right behind this outcropping. When Philip turned that corner, well, that's when he saw that UFO. On January 3rd, 1988, the investigators traveled back to Ilkley for a second look at the event site. They got to Philip's house, and then they spent some time going over the case. They all discussed the photograph. They had had a few days to examine it. The image, of course, was grainy and it lacked fine detail, but it clearly showed a small green figure standing in a large hollow. The figure appeared to have a long body, short, thin legs, and what looked like protrusions on the side of its head. One arm seemed unusually long, resting near the ground, while the other one was raised slightly in this crooked position, consistent with Philip's description of the creature having waved him off. The compass, however, presented a different problem. Now, check this out. The polarity had been completely reversed. What? Instead of pointing north, the needle now pointed south. That's crazy, right? The report later stated that there was no physical signs of tampering. Well, that afternoon, they all walked up into the hills. The air was cold and the wind was strong. Black storm clouds were moving across the sky. Philip showed them exactly where he had been standing and where the figure had been when he had taken the photograph. They did some measurements, and they discovered that the distance from the camera position to the place where the figure had stood was approximately 39 feet. Then they followed the path around that outcropping to that deeper hollow where Philip said that he saw that silver disc hovering. That hollow measured 31 feet across. Now, I thought this was interesting. Throughout the visit, Philip remained calm and answered questions easily, showing no obvious fear or signs of distress from being back at the event site. If something like that had happened to me, well, I think that I would have been affected in some way, returning to the area. Maybe not so much just by seeing that creature, but that, combined with seeing that UFO, would have been pretty intense. Don't you think? Well, the report stated later that many people who claim to have witnessed this sort of a thing often display a kind of emotional detachment when describing extraordinary events like these, almost as if the full impact had somehow been suppressed. The investigators returned down the hill just as the storm clouds began to roll in. Well, shortly after this meeting, they took the negative and the reverse compass to experts for deep analysis, and what they discovered was surprising.
Velarcana.
Shortly after the investigation started, Jenny Randles joined the team, and on January 11th, she took the print and the negative to Tony Marshall, a professional wildlife photographer in Sheffield. Marshall placed the negative on a light box, and he studied it under magnification. He found a small scratch on the negative in the area where that faint box-like shape appeared on the print. He suggested that maybe during the printing process, light just might have been diffused by that scratch, creating that perfect square-shaped image. Either that, or there really was some artificial-looking box behind the creature in that area where the UFO had been sighted. He could offer no other real explanation for what he was seeing. Comparative measurements between the original photograph and pictures taken later from the same position showed that the figure must have stood right around 4 foot tall. Later that same day, the negative and the print were shown to the director of a firm of screen printers who had a pretty sophisticated darkroom. Well, he also examined the negative and he found no evidence that the photograph had been tampered with. But he did note that it was slightly out of focus, and there was some slight flaring along the bottom and the sides, which he attributed to the quality of the processing rather than any deliberate interference. He could think of no natural feature in the landscape that could account for that box-like shape. The negative was then sent to Peter Suthurst at Kodak. Those are the people that made the film. His report, dated February 1st, stated that the image was underexposed by a couple of stops. This explained the graininess. He also found a degree of camera shake, which is what made the identification of that small figure difficult. Crucially, he concluded that the film had not been tampered with after processing. The figure, whatever it was, had indeed been physically present at that site the moment that the shutter had been pressed. He suggested that the artificially looking white square on the print could maybe be some form of reflection, either in the lens or maybe in the field of view. He wasn't sure. Image enhancement, he advised, would be costly and it was unlikely to yield any useful information, given the condition under which the photograph had been taken. While the photograph was being scrutinized, the compass was taken to the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology. Dr. Spooner, head of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Electronics, examined it. Testing showed that a rapidly applied or pulsed magnetic field could reverse the polarity. The minimum field strength required to do this was roughly 2,000 times greater than the Earth's natural magnetic field. Dr. Spooner demonstrated that this could actually be achieved using household electricity by coiling a wire around the compass and then connecting it directly to the mains, and then somehow creating this rapid pulse. The process could then theoretically be done at home, but it would be extremely dangerous and easily risk an electrical fire. These findings created a new problem. If the compass had been deliberately reversed to support a hoax, well, it could have been done at home, but it would require both knowledge and a willingness to take significant risk. If the reversal had occurred on the moor, as Philip claimed that it had, well, then something at that site must have generated an extremely powerful pulsating magnetic field. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that on January 15th, 2 middle-aged men in business suits showed up at Phillips's house. They showed him identification cards representing the Ministry of Defense, and they asked to speak to him about his experience. Well, Philip felt like he had been hit by a truck. No one except the investigators had known anything about the incident. During the conversation, the men asked whether any photographs had been taken. Afraid to lie, Philip said that the materials were with a friend. The men did not press the matter any further and left shortly thereafter. Well, as soon as they were gone, Philip immediately telephoned one of the investigators. This, of course, was completely unsettling. No one in the group had any idea how in the world the Ministry of Defense could have found out about the case. Well, the following morning, Philip's distress increased. He received a phone call from someone claiming to represent the Mirror Group newspaper. The caller knew Philip's name, and he asked about the sighting. Well, Philip ended the call and then immediately dialed Mirror Group's main office, asking if anyone from there had called him. Well, they assured him that no one from the newspaper had reached out. They further stated that they most certainly would not have pursued a UFO story even if one had been offered to them. Well, at this point, Philip was convinced that someone in the group had leaked the details of this case, and he demanded the immediate return of his negative and compass and said that he wanted no further involvement. Jenny Randles spoke with him for quite a while and eventually persuaded him that it was in everyone's best interest, including his own, to allow the investigation to continue. So reluctantly, he agreed. The investigators now faced a situation that they had not anticipated. Someone outside of the group appeared to have learned about the case and had shown an interest in this photographic material. The questions that had begun up on that moor were no longer limited to what Philip had seen. No, now they extended to who else knew about this and why.
Velarcana.
A few weeks after the team received Peter Suther's report from Kodak, it was agreed that Philip would undergo hypnosis in an attempt to pull out any memories that might be suppressed. You know, I hear this a lot in these strange alien encounter stories, hypnotic regression, and I'm curious if any of you believe that this sort of thing really works. Would you let me know what you think in the comments below? Well, the team arranged for a clinical psychologist, Dr. Jim Singleton, to conduct the session. It took place on a Saturday afternoon in March of 1988 at Arthur Tomlinson's home. Under hypnosis, Philip's account changed significantly. He described hiking across the moor and seeing that small green figure, but not as he remembered it. No, he had remembered that it had been moving away from him, kind of waving him on. But in the regression, it was moving toward him. And to make matters worse, once he saw the creature, Philip couldn't move. As this being approached, Philip was somehow lifted into the air and then floated around that outcropping and into that deeper hollow where that silver craft waited. He remembered seeing an opening in the side of the craft and feeling a strong reluctance not to enter. But of course, he was powerless to stop what was happening. Then everything went black. When he came to, he found himself on something like an examination table inside of a brightly lighted room. Then a voice told him not to be afraid. Then a beam of light passed slowly up his body from his feet to his head. He said that the beam felt warm. After this examination, I guess, he was led down a corridor into a room where he described being shown 2 films. One film seemed to show future scenes of environmental destruction.
There were a lot of scenes of destruction, like on the news. I saw lots of waste going into the river, and people who looked like Ethiopians starving. It was not good.
When he was asked about the second film, all he said was that he wasn't supposed to tell anyone about it. I wonder what that means, and what that second film showed. He also described the beings on the craft. He said that they were small, around 4 feet tall, with, now get this, big pointed ears. I've never heard that before in these types of stories. Have you? He also said that they had large dark eyes, almost no noses, and very large hands with 3 fingers, fat fingers, at the ends. And their feet were V-shaped. Not sure how he would know that. I guess they were barefooted or their shoes fit their feet. I don't know. And he said they moved with this shuffling gait rather than walking like a human. After the session, when asked how he now felt about these entities, Philip said that he had a sense of goodness about them, that he didn't believe that they meant humanity any harm. Now, looking back, he says that he actually liked them. Personally, I think that any alien race that can change one's memories can also change one's perceptions, making that person believe that they're good-natured when maybe they're not. Later, a radiation test was carried out at the site. No evidence of unusual radiation was found. In the months and the years that followed, Philip remained consistent in his account, but he became increasingly reflective about what had happened. In a private letter, he wrote that the experience had changed him profoundly. He said that now he questioned everything. What had happened to him on that moor, he wrote, had been impossible. It threw everything that he thought was normal and secure into question. If even part of what he experienced was real, well, then the world wasn't quite the place that he believed it was. He walked out onto Ilkley Moor one ordinary December morning carrying only a camera and a compass, and he returned with both items altered and with a stretch of time missing from his life. What he brought back with him wasn't certainty. No, it was a lasting sense that something had reached out from beyond and somehow touched him. I think it's easy to dismiss stories like this one. The photograph is grainy and imperfect, and even stated by the experts, the compass could have been reversed at home, albeit with a measure of difficulty and risk. On the other hand, there are details about this case that are extremely difficult to dismiss. A film that laboratories, including the one at Kodak, the people that made the film, couldn't prove was fake. A compass whose reversal would have required either specialized equipment or a very dangerous procedure that most people would never even think of, much less attempt. And a witness who never sought attention or reward. He still remains anonymous. Philip Spencer is a pseudonym. He didn't want then and doesn't want now any attention. That, for me, is probably the strongest indicator that there just might be some truth to this story. He never came forward to write a book or make any money of any kind. This case, at least for me, sits in this uncomfortable space where neither full acceptance nor outright rejection feels entirely comfortable. If something did reach across the moor that December morning and somehow pull a man out of his ordinary life, well, then the boundary between what we think is possible and what we think is impossible may just be our own bias on what we would like the world to be. And if this can happen to an ordinary man in the hills of West Yorkshire, England, a man who never would have known had he not had that picture and that compass, well then maybe this can happen to any of us. And maybe it already has, and we just don't know it because we didn't have a camera or a compass.
My research shows this case was originally written under the title The Perfect Abduction in the Northern UFO News periodical by Peter Hough, who worked closely with Jenny Randles. In the report, Hough describes how the case was uncovered, investigated, and, wait for it, taken without permission to the tabloids. According to Hough and BUFORA, the photograph was taken to the Daily Star by Steve Balin, against the wishes of the witness and the investigators. And once that happened, the photo was dragged through the mud, treated like a sideshow, and ultimately dismissed as a hoax. All of this before Hough wrote his article. In the article, Hough states, on 27 June, Balin sold, or gave, the story to the Daily Star out of what looks suspiciously like spite. It was, of course, trivialized bosh that had several facts wrong. It is vital to note that this witness purposefully assigned copyright of the photo to Hough some weeks before, for good reasons, and Balin was informed of this shortly before he went to the Star. So, as far as where do I stand on this case, I'm just not sure. Peter Hough seemed to be a pretty respected researcher, and I do wonder if that photo had never been leaked, would Philip Spencer have come forward? Something else I wonder? Have you checked out our Buy Me a Coffee site yet? It's the perfect way to support the work Damon and I do here at Velarcana, and it helps us keep digging into strange cases like this one. Until next time, stay curious.